Hidden Gems, Episode 1, The Pilot. Welcome to Hidden Gems, a board game podcast where we review unusual, forgotten, and underappreciated board games. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
Jason.
And I'm Cameron. Thanks for listening to our show.
We're doing a podcast.
Woo!
We made it.
Finally.
It's happening.
This is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We just recorded our very first recording for the podcast ever, an episode all about us. We talk about our board game histories, our video game histories, kind of how we got to know each other. A lot of fun.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed
episode
it so
0.
far.
I was hoping that after episode 0, the start for episode 1 would be easier. It's not yet.
Nope.
But if you care about that sort of thing, about our history and about what brought us here, go check it out.
Yeah, for sure.
I have to tell you guys, I'm super pumped. Like, I always feel really awesome when I have a super fresh haircut.
You look pretty snazzy.
Thank you. Thank you so
Cut
much.
real high.
Yes, it is indeed. I feel really funny. I came here tonight, as I was leaving to come here to record. My wife was like, "Wow, you look really nice." And I realized that because we're finally recording, I put on a button down and
For all our listeners who
had
can
all
see.
my, had a sufficient amount of beard oil in my beard, and I realized, oh yeah, we're not recording video.
It's just us, man.
That's right.
We appreciate it.
I do have to say that I appreciate that Chris is holding on the fort with the gym shorts.
Oh, absolutely. And my backwards hat
That's right.
means I'm ready for business.
It's perfect because you guys can't tell that I look amazing and Chris looks like he's chilling at home.
Like I always do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited to be finally making this podcast. Obviously, we've put a lot of effort into preparation and figuring out what games we want to talk about and playing all of the games multiple times so that we have meaningful thoughts about these games that we found. And I'm pretty excited to talk about them tonight, to be honest.
Oh, me too, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not surprised, but this is all that's been on my mind for the last month probably.
Yeah.
I'm super excited about it. I'm working, I'm driving down the road, and I've got my kids in the car, and I'm like, y'all, check out our show music that we've decided to use, and I start playing our opening music, and my kids are they couldn't eye roll any harder, right? I don't know when the word cringy entered the modern lexicon so heavily, but kids use it all the time now, and they seem to use it to describe me frequently. And Bryce is just mortified that we're doing a board game podcast. He thinks it's just the nerdiest thing ever.
See, that's the benefit of having younger kids. My 9-year-old still thinks it's pretty cool. So I can get away with it for a few more years.
None of my kids think it's cool, and I'm an 8-year-old.
Bryce was in here earlier just kind of laughing at us with our microphones all set up, and it's great.
Yeah, he thinks we're going to fail. I think he's just jealous that I'm going to, maybe have more followers than he has on his Twitch streams for his video games or whatever. But
unlikely.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see. Yeah. He's pretty baller on the video games that he plays.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
All right, so Chris, what are we going to talk about this episode?
Yeah, so the title for this episode is The Pilot, because obviously this is our first episode. From week to week, the title will change, usually based on what kind of board games we're reviewing. So most of our episodes, I think at this point, will be themed episodes.
Okay.
We might be looking at games from a particular board game designer, highlighting games that we think are hidden gems from that particular designer, or maybe from a particular publisher like Queen Games, or maybe board games surrounding a certain type of theme that we find is to be interesting or fun. Or some weeks we're just going to do a random assortment of games. And that's actually what we're doing tonight. We just kind of handpicked a few games that we thought would be good for the first episode. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we've got some fun stuff planned.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the games. You are a rogue archaeologist, traveling the world for history's lost artifacts. But the market for artifacts can shift like the rains of Africa. 1 minute treasures from a lost pharaoh's pyramid are all the rage with collectors. And in the next minute, religious artifacts discovered in a remote temple are what's in demand. Curios.
beautiful reading of the flavor text.
That was amazing.
Thanks.
That was. I feel inspired. That's great. Yeah. So we'll just go ahead and say now. So for each game that we review, we will be reading the flavor text for each one, and that is Cameron's job alone because he does such a wonderful
It's
job of that.
super fun.
Somebody spent a long time writing those words, so
That's right.
We have to honor the theme and the flavor of each of our potential gems.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well done. All right. So
And speaking of gems, Curios.
Curios, published in 2019 by AEG. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 4,953, so pretty far down there. The designer of this game is actually uncredited, which is pretty unusual for a game that comes out in 2019. Usually when you see a game that's uncredited, has an uncredited designer, it's usually an old game. So to be honest, I don't know why that is. I actually tried to research it, like in the BGG forums, and there's no explanation for that. And this is not an old reprint of an old game.
Were they just ashamed of it?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's bad. I don't know. Maybe it's good. We'll see.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. So in preparation for this podcast, I started kind of scouring the BGG database. Okay. So if you go into the search engine on BGG and go into advanced search and then order the games in numerical order based on overall rating, you can go to page 50 of the BGG rankings and it'll take you all the way to game 5,000. And I just started working my way forward from there. This was a few months ago. And just kind of perusing through the list, I saw this game, Curios. And I was like, I've never heard of this game, which is pretty unusual. Like I said, I listen to a lot of board game media and I just never heard of it. So I took note of it. Well, at around that same time, that's when we were taking our trip to Kansas to see our family for Thanksgiving. And just randomly, I happened to see it on a shelf in a board game store, I think in Kansas, of all places. And it was cheap, because it's not a very big game. And I was like, well, I'm going to buy this. It's cheap. I want to try it out. So that's how I acquired it, was just kind of scouring the BGG ratings and finding it in a random board game store.
Sweet. Well, how do you play Curios?
Yeah, so Curios, brief rule summary. So the idea of Curios is you have a team of archaeologists that are represented by pawns. Okay, so you start with a team of 5 archaeologists, and they're going to be excavating these 4 different sites on the board. And each of these sites has a gemstone associated with it, a pile of gems. Okay, so each one of these gems will have a different point value assigned to it in the game. So if you have a red gem, for example, it might be worth 5 points or it might be worth 1 point. And that's what's interesting about the game, is that at the start of the game, you don't know how much each one of those 4 gems is worth. You'll have an idea about how much you think they might be worth. And as the game progresses, you'll gain more information about how much you think they're worth. And you're trying to basically gain the highest total value of gems of anybody at the table. Okay?
So a gem could be worth 1
all the way up to 7.
to 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the way that works is each different location will have a card assigned to it. So each location has 4 cards that go with it, a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 7. At the start of the game, you're going to shuffle those cards up for each location, and you're going to randomly assign one of those 4 cards to the location face down. That is how much that gem is worth. But like I said, you don't know that because it's face down, okay? But where you start to get information in this game is that all of the cards that aren't put face down for each location are then shuffled and then are dealt out to the people at the table. So when you look at your hand of cards, you're going to have some information about each site. So for example, if I'm holding the 5 of yellow, I know that gems that are yellow in color can't be worth 5 because I'm holding the 5. Right. It can only be 1, 3, or 7. Okay? So the way the game plays is you take one of your archaeologist pawns, if I'm the first player, and I place a pawn on a site, and I take a gem from that location. Okay? So then it moves to the next player. That player can either place a pawn on another site and take a gem from that location with its corresponding gem color, or you can place where the person before you placed. But the trick is, if you place somewhere where somebody else is placed, it's now 1 more pawn expensive. It costs you 2 to go there instead of 1. But you might want to pay more because you might have a pretty good idea that those gems are good.
Right. Why did the first player go there?
Exactly. So, and that's how information is gained in this game, is as people are placing out, or if certain people seem to be really focusing on one gem color, you might start to figure out how much you think that gem is worth.
Maybe they know something
Exactly.
you don't.
Exactly. So the last thing you do in the game, it's very simple. You place a pawn or pawns, you take a gem. Okay? Once all of the pawns are placed out, whoever has a majority on each location of pawns will get an additional gem from that location. Okay? Then all the pawns are pulled off, and then you'll do something where you take all the cards in your hand, and you have the option, you don't have to, but you have the option of playing a card face up to the table, thereby giving everybody at the table information about the location. So if I turn the blue 3 up, now everybody knows that blue gems are not worth 3. Mm-hmm. But in exchange for that, I get to take an additional pawn from the stock, and now I have an extra guy to place in a future round.
That's super helpful if you're holding a blue card, right?
Right. Yeah, so you can give up some information that maybe you don't think is important to get more people to place. Okay. The way the game ends is once 2 piles are expired, the game ends, and then you flip the cards over, you see how much the gems are worth. Whoever has the highest total value of gems wins the game.
Yeah.
So that's the rules for Curios. So the way we do things here on Hidden Gems, we keep our discussion pretty focused. So we're going to talk about pros to the games, and we're going to talk about cons to the game. So we always talk about the positive first. So we'll start with the pros. So Jason, what do you think about Curios? What do you like about it?
Yeah, I'll come right out and say I found this game to be pretty enjoyable. I think for the length, obviously it's a filler game, but for the length of the game, I think there's a lot of really good and interesting decisions going on here. The theme is light, obviously. I think most filler games, there's not a whole lot of theme coming through, but there's that element of I'm trying to select the gems that are going to be the most valuable, and I don't know what those are going to be, right?
Right.
And I think that element of not knowing what information other people are holding, but having some information in my hand of I know what these gems are not worth is a really interesting decision to make. And then it comes down to there's that additional decision of each round, am I going to turn over a card and potentially give other people information that's really going to benefit them to get that extra pawn? And I think that's really interesting because there's a bluffing element going on as well too, right? I have to watch what everybody else is doing. If Cameron goes for a red gem, does that mean he knows something about it? I have to really think about that. Or maybe he's
throwing you off.
Right.
Yeah.
Or maybe he's just grabbing a red gem because he wants to confuse me, right?
Right.
And then as that information slowly trickles out throughout the game, it gives you that little bit more of an edge of, well, maybe I need to focus on going after this other color over here before it runs out.
Right.
So, yeah, I had a good time working out those decisions.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point. One of the things I really like about this game is you will start to figure things out. You can know the value of a gem for sure once the game starts to get really into it, deeper into the game. Even at the start, though, you can have a pretty good idea. But where you really have to be careful with this game, and I think it's interesting, is let's say I know that a gem is pretty good. If I start to really hit that hard, if everybody else is paying attention, they're going to see that, right? And so you are telling everybody, I'm pretty sure this is good, right? So if you really go for something hard early, everybody else is just going to jump right on with you, right? So you kind of have to be sneaky about it a little bit. You're like, I'll grab one when it's cheap. I'll try to get the majority here and maybe get an extra one, but I'll try to spread out a little bit so I'm not like overplaying my hand, because then everybody will start to grab onto that, right?
Yeah, that's the other element too that I forgot to mention is that pawn placement is critical.
Right.
Because the first space on a card only requires 1 pawn. After that, it requires 2, then 3, then potentially even 4. So you can find yourself in a situation where you don't even have enough pawns to place in a given location, or any location for that matter. And so figuring out when to go hard after a particular color and potentially get that majority and that extra gem, which can be really valuable, that makes for some interesting puzzles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about the game was it's dead simple to learn, and yet it's hard to win.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think I agree with Jason. I really like the hidden knowledge aspect. You get kind of certainty about some things, but you have to wonder about others. You have to go with your best guess about where to put your resources. I think Jason also mentioned it's not really a luck game, but you also can't simply win on pure deduction or strategy. I enjoy that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm coming from a person who, as I'm sure we'll talk about in future game reviews, like I really enjoy a bit of randomness, a bit of push your luck, features to a game. But this one's like, there's not really a ton of luck to it. I mean, kind of the only randomness is like which cards do you get. We had the opportunity to play this differently 2 different times, one with 4 players, one with 5 players at least. And I actually appreciated the difference between 4 and 5 players being that with 4 players, you actually take cards out, I believe.
You do.
But with 5, all the cards are in.
So with 5 players, 2 of the cards are randomly removed face down. Nobody ever sees.
Okay.
But the thing that's interesting about a 5-player game, in a 3-player game, you get dealt 4 cards, and if you choose to reveal, you only usually have to reveal up to 2. So you'll still have some information you hold back. But in a 5-player game, if you want to get access to both of your pawns, you have to give up everything.
All of your cards.
Which makes a really interesting decision of, am I going to show all of this? Yes. Especially if you see people going after a gem that you know is not good, which is incredibly satisfying.
Right. You risk giving perfect knowledge to your opponents.
You don't want them to know.
And I think this is like one of the agonizing components. I think we talk about, one of the things that I think, we're going to talk about a lot is like, what are the decisions that you have to make in a game? And one of the gut-wrenching decisions in this game is, am I going to give perfect knowledge to my opponents in order to be able to play enough pawns? Because once you get to the end of the game, if you can't compete in terms of being able to place enough pawns out to play on a 3 spot or a 4 spot, you're kind of out of luck. You're not going to be able to be competitive.
What's interesting about that, though, is that in most worker placement type games, getting more workers is always what you do. Right.
Always
if there's an option to get more
move.
workers, you always get more workers. But what's interesting about this game is that because of the way the worker placement dynamic works, where you always need more workers in order to place on the next available space, having more workers doesn't always benefit you in this game, from what I've found playing it a few times. And so that really forces that decision of, is it really valuable or not to get this extra worker? Because it might not. You might be sitting on 2 workers that you can't place, and one of those is one that you just gained from showing everyone else information.
Well, it very much depends on what you're holding back.
Right.
I think that was one of the things that I've discovered is, and I kind of think this maybe is a good opportunity to transition to cons, because I'm not sure. I'm a little bit on either side of it with this one. I think it's a con, which is, it very much matters whether you get a 1 or a 7 versus a 3 or a 5. If you're holding a 1 or a 7, you don't really want to lay that down and show the world, because, for example, if it's a 1, if you lay down a 1, you're proving to everyone else that's at least worth 3.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is valuable.
If you throw a 7 down, you're proving to everyone that one's, not a great one, because it's not going to be worth 7. At the most, it could be worth 5.
Right.
And if the 5 has already been laid out, you're telling that everyone else the most yellow or whatever is worth is 3.
Yeah, I would say laying down a 1 is much more helpful than a 7, because what's also interesting about this game is, depending on how the cards come out, there might not be any gems that are worth 7. They could all be worth 1 and 3, and we actually had games like that. Where we were all trying to figure out what the most valuable gem was, and then we started to all figure out, they're all kind of crappy. And I think it was in a game we were playing with Jason. Jason ended up winning because I think he figured that out, and instead of trying to get a certain one, he just tried to get as many as possible by getting majorities, and he just won based solely on the fact that he had more gems than everybody else. Right? I think the game can be different based on that randomness of the cards.
Yeah, and that may, I think, emphasize like why I'm a little bit on either side of the fence of whether or not the whole randomness of which cards you get is actually a con, because what you just described sounds a lot more like a self-balancing thing, right? Yeah. In other words, the cards can kind of fall however they will, but the game is still going to come down to who gets the most points, whether that's points from 5s and 7s or points from 1s and 3s.
The other aspect to that, too, though, is a timing thing. If everybody thinks that yellow is super valuable and they hammer that color, then revealing a 1 or a 7 of that color doesn't matter as much at that point, right? Because everybody's already bought in. So if everybody's already bought into a particular color, and then I show the 7, like, thanks for you, right?
Although it's a lot of fun if you have, like, say, 40% more yellow gems than everyone else, and then I prove to everyone else that all your gems are worth 1. That's
exactly.
Even if I don't win, it's a lot of fun.
Exactly.
So yeah, going into cons, I think is a good place to segue. In a similar vein to what you were just saying, but I do just want to reiterate this. One of the few cons I did have written down here is if you start the game with a 1 and a 3 of the same color, that's a big advantage. If I know, and it happens rarely, but it happens, if I know that a yellow gem has to at least be a 5 or 7, that is hugely helpful. However, going back to what we said right at the beginning of the review, if I know that and I start hammering yellow, everybody's going to take it, right? So that's where you have to be like really careful about not overplaying your hand and giving away too much.
Yeah, for me, cons, I would agree with what's already been said. You know, just practically speaking, there are a few minor things, I think, with the components that could maybe be improved. You're playing with basic plastic pawns that look like they're from, you know, the game Sorry, right?
Yeah.
And some of the colors could be a little bit more distinct. Green and blue are pretty close to each other.
Very similar.
Right.
It's in a freaking tin.
Yeah.
Which I despise, because it doesn't stack.
Right. So, I mean, a couple minor issues like that. But for me, I think there weren't a whole lot of cons to be pulled out, honestly, for the length of game that it is. So.
Yeah. I had a couple more that I wanted to bring up. One, and you sort of touched on this in reference to the art, the theme of taking on the role of a rogue archaeologist, delving into various locations in order to obtain artifacts. It feels a little bit pasted on to the mechanics of the game. And I say that respecting and enjoying and appreciating the mechanics of the game, but it just feels a little bit pasted on. To me, it doesn't contribute to the player's understanding of the game mechanics, which is something that I tend to look for. I like to find that linkage between the theme that the author gave to this game and the mechanics. I love discovering rules linking with the theme and the mode of the game or whatever. And I love those moments when you're sort of like waiting for your turn and like the light bulb turns on because you understand why that card's named that way and you sort of feel the setting of the game more intensely. And that's what I'm looking for in a more immersive game. So like I mentioned it as a con just because I feel like I have to sort of like at least think about that when I'm reviewing a game. And for a bigger game that I'm going to spend a lot more time with, like I would probably dock it, a little bit more if it were a longer game. The other one is I think it's possible for player order. I'm kind of curious what you guys think about player order because I think it's possible for player order to have too great of an impact on what you're able to do. I've seen cases particularly in 5-player games where you have a lot more competition for the same amount of real estate where your first, the first turn you place a dude and then your second turn you have to go for like 3 or 4. And you're, find yourself more than once throughout the game, like sitting there with like a pawn or two that you've got 2 pawns and you can't place anywhere because the only available spots are 3s or 4s.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one thing that is worth mentioning here, I think at 3 and 4, this game is at its best. Although at 5, it plays interestingly because the 2 cards are removed. But the problem with the 5-player game is that whoever's in the 5th seat will probably never lead a round because the game will end before they can ever place first. That seems to be a big disadvantage. In a high-player game, if you're farther around the table, it could be harder for you to win.
Yeah. My last one is it was really hard for me to remember to take my gem. I put all this focus on placing my pawns out
every single time.
Chris is like, Cameron, take your gem.
Became a mantra around the table.
Or he would just start throwing it
the
at
gem.
me.
Unbelievable. All right, so we ready to go to overall impression and grade?
So.
All right, yeah. So before we do that, certainly for this first episode and for the first few, I think it would be worth us going through our grading scheme just so you'll understand how we grade games. And I'll also say on the front end that The idea behind this grading system is borrowed heavily from Heavy Cardboard, which is a great podcast that I enjoy and I recommend. But I like the way they do it, and I think it makes sense to me. So we're also going to grade on a 1 to 6 scale, okay? So a 1 for us means that the game is flawed. In other words, we dislike it, and the reason that we don't like it is because we think that there's something wrong with the game mechanically. A 2 means that there's nothing necessarily wrong with the game mechanically. We just think the game is bad. We just don't like it, okay? We don't enjoy it. 3 game is a fair game. It would be what we would call a meh game. It's just okay. It doesn't really excite us. It's just okay. The distinction between 3 and 4, for me personally, this is where my breaking point is between whether I will or will not keep a game. So a 4 is a good game. We enjoy the game. We like the game. We play the game. And for me, I'll keep the game. 5 is an excellent game. A game that we really enjoy. Wouldn't refuse a play of this game. We think it's well above average. And then 6 is our flawless category, where to us, we think that it's nearly perfect, and we love the game. We think it's a great game. Yeah, absolutely. So, Jason, overall impression graded for Curios.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I definitely enjoyed this game. I think for the length that it is and the amount of decisions that are involved, definitely a keeper for me. I gave this game a 4. I think, you'll find as we go through this, I've been labeled the bad cop for this podcast because I tend to rate games pretty strictly. And so, I tend to rate on the lower end of the scale when it comes to just overall ratings on anything, really. But I gave this game a 4. I enjoyed it. I think I would definitely keep it. I don't own it, but I might in the future.
All right. Cameron?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we really, the three of us, put a lot of emphasis on, and Jason mentioned this quite a few times, is like kind of in the category of like investment, right? What kind of investment do you consider playing this game being? And like, obviously for Curios, it's a short game. It's a delightfully short game. It's one that, we call them filler games, but like honestly, for a game that's as enjoyable as Curios, like filler is kind of like a yucky term to use for it, because I'm considering it a good game. Number 4. If I showed up for a game night and someone wasn't here yet, and you said, well, why don't we just play Curios? I'd be like, yeah. Let's do it. Yeah,
perfect for that.
It's got the right length. It's got the right amount of rules. If we had a new person that had never played it before, it's not a problem to teach the game and jump right into a first play. So I give it a 4.
All right. So Curios, pleasantly surprised by this game. I think there are a lot of games that label themselves as filler games or like to think of themselves as filler games that are not filler games. To me, a filler game should be a game that's quick to teach, plays quickly while you're waiting for people to show up, while you're winding down a game night. And this fits the bill perfectly for that. I have played this game several times in a row with people where we just played game after game after game. They were just so intrigued by it. I think it does what it sets out to do really well, and the deduction of the game, while simple to understand, is still interesting. Mm-hmm. And because I feel like it does such a good job at being a good filler game, I actually give this game a 5. All right. So I'm the good cop of the group. I tend to like games, be more impressed by games. And I just kept thinking about this game. I was like, this game is a great filler. You can't compare this game to like Terraforming Mars, which I also think is a great game. It's probably a 6 for me, but another really great game because they're just not the same. But for a filler game, when I try to think of other filler games that I have or that I've played that I like more than this one, I cannot think of many. And so for that reason, it gets a 5 for me because it does what it sets out to do really well, right?
Yeah, I will say that I was, for as bad cop as I can be, I was on the fence with this one between 4 and 5. And hearing your description of it, and I think it's important to call out that we don't discuss our ratings beforehand. That's one of the key elements. It's difficult to do on a standard game night to not talk about our feelings on these games, but it's an important element for us to not discuss our feelings and bias each other beforehand. So we haven't discussed this
Nope.
before right now. And I will say your description is pushing me a little bit more towards the 5 end of the spectrum. But yeah, definitely in between a 4 and a 5.
So that's Curios. Where could you buy Curios if you're interested?
Yeah, so Curios, from the research that I did, it's readily available in online retailers, so you shouldn't have any difficulty finding it. You could probably also pretty easily find this game at your friendly local game store in the area, or at least look for it. I mean, that's where I found it.
Okay.
I found it in a game store in Kansas. So it came down in 2019, pretty recently released. You should be able to find it in one of those 2 ways. There are also copies available on the Board Game Geek marketplace as well, if you want to get it there. And that's it. Those are our thoughts on Curios.
Fantastic. There are a lot of animals on the African plains. Elephants, lions, zebras, hippos, giraffes. We aren't sure of exactly how they live. Animal researchers are constantly studying them in order to find out more. In this game, players are animal researchers, trying to get as much info as possible about the animals on the savannah.
Once again, great job, Ken.
Beautiful.
So this is String Savanna, published in 2013, designed by Hisashi Hayashi, also known for the amazing Yokohama. Published by Okazu brand, or more recently by IDW Pandasaurus. Currently, as of the time of this recording, ranked on BGG 9,605. Pretty far down.
It's almost double Curios.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
So, Chris, this is actually your game. How did you hear about it?
Yeah, so to be totally honest, I don't remember how I heard about it. I remember where I got it. I usually can recall where I heard about games. This is one of those instances where I just can't remember where I heard about it. But I did purchase it from a guy off of Craigslist in Durham. So that's how I got it, which is actually a pretty good way to find games.
Are you looking for this game on Craigslist?
I was. Well, not specifically, but I saw it in his listing, and I was like, oh, I've been looking for this. Okay. This is how I'm going to get it. And this is actually not a bad point to talk about, because as we talk about games on this podcast, it's not going to be that uncommon that some of these games could be hard to find. So looking on things like Craigslist or on Facebook groups where people sell games online is a good way to find these games as well, because some of them, we'll just go ahead and say, could be hard to find. And that's where I got this one.
Okay.
So, Jason, why don't you give us a brief rule summary?
Yeah, so String Savanna, this is definitely one of those games that I think fits in the unique category. So in this game, we are animal researchers wandering the safari looking for groups of animals that are related. So the setup for this game actually involves a large loop of string that gets laid out on the table in some sort of random arrangement, right? It can be a circle, it can be,
however you want
it to be shaped, right?
It might be shaped like Africa.
It might be shaped like Africa, right? Yeah, and so within that circle or that shape, a bunch of animal cards of different types and species get placed, and each of these animal cards is square-shaped. So that's important for the stage that comes next. The goal of the game is that each player is going to be given, at the start of the game, a goal card. So that goal card gives them an objective for what types of animals they're trying to basically lasso with a smaller rope ring. So,
it's a shoelace.
It's a shoelace.
Let's be real, it's a shoelace.
That's true.
Piece of yarn, yeah.
So on a player's turn, what they're going to do is they're going to take a look at this research card that they have in front of them, and then they're going to take a smaller loop of string and try to lay that string out in one attempt around a set of animals within the larger group that matches the condition of their research card to score points. Each animal card has a couple different elements on it. So it can be the type of food that the animal eats. It can be the time of day that the animal comes active. It can be the species of animal.
What kind of class of animal it is? Like, or is it?
Yeah, are they cats? Are they monkeys? Are they cows? Right. And so,
is that a genus? or a family.
Not even that detailed. It's literally just like
I have a high school biology education, so
Yeah, it's one of those things. Biology wasn't my thing. Anyway, there are different qualifications on these animal cards that match the research cards that you're trying to collect points with. Each research card is also worth an amount of points at the end of the game. So certain cards might be worth a lot of points, but you get less points for the animals that you rope in. Whereas other cards might be worth negative points, but they're going to give you a lot of points for the animals that you rope in. So, and then finally, once you loop in a group of animals, you get to choose one animal that you've looped in, and you get to select that animal and place one of your player pieces on top of that animal. And each animal has its own point value that it's worth at the end of the game as well. So basically, you have a set number of turns. Each player, depending on the player count, has a certain number of player pieces that they get to place on an animal, which is basically one turn in the game. And so you go through that number of turns, you grab your animals, you try to maximize the amount of points that you can get off your research card. At the end of your turn, you'll grab another research card from a group of them that are available. You can choose from the ones that are available, or you can draw a blind off the top of a stack. And yeah, that's pretty much the basic gist of the game, is trying to maximize the amount of points on any given turn that you can get off of your research card and grabbing the highest valued animals that are out on the board. So, Cameron, what were your thoughts on String Savanna?
Yeah, so it's definitely an unusual game mechanic. So the game challenges your spatial recognition skills a bit, because you'll be looking at a board trying to figure out if you can rope in that one more vegetarian animal, or maybe squeeze in that +2 terrain square, or one more dog type when you're going for dogs.
Are animals vegetarians?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. That's one of the things. They can either be carnivorous or omnivorous or vegetarian, right? Yeah, so like all the cows that eat grass. So, and that's unusual. I mean, a lot of games, like, they pretty much are challenging more of your like analytic skills, your deduction skills, or something like that. Because the string is flexible, you have to look at these tiles laid out and decide whether the shoelace will go around them the way that you think that it's going to go around them. And I've had turns
before you place it down.
Right. I've had turns where like you commit to a spot and you're like, oh, I thought I was going to be able to get that fourth cow in there, and I can't actually, and so I don't get those points or whatever. And that's unusual. I kind of appreciated that, but then your turn comes around and you can't get nearly the points that you thought unless you're Jason and you just somehow scored 13 points like every single turn. I also enjoyed the fact that there's so many different factors that can score you points. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, so one of the pros of this game, it's kind of been mentioned already, but it's really my biggest one as well. This game is very unique and unusual. The string lane mechanic I've never seen before. That's part of the reason why I was attracted to it, obviously, and that's part of the reason why it's on this show. There's just nothing really quite like it. That visual spatial puzzle of looking at this loop of yarn and then looking at the board and seeing what you need to try to encircle and trying to decide what you can get around is very unique. I found that to be a fun activity to do.
Yeah, it is definitely unique. I think it actually fits the theme pretty well too, right?
You mean it's string and it's a Savanna?
Yeah, it is a string and it is a Savanna. I don't know how, relevant strings are to the Savanna, but, in terms of feeling like you are going out and searching for the correct grouping of animals and trying to identify or cite, the right set of animals, I think it does give some good decisions to be made, but it really boils down to what research card am I going to pick? What do I see out on the board that is a good opportunity at the moment, and what research card do I grab right now? Right. So I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of strategy involved necessarily, but there are some good tactical opportunities, which maybe transitioning to cons for me, I think there's an element to which I kind of felt that like this game should have been shorter than it was, right? For me,
it's pushing the limits of a filler game for sure.
Because I think that the fact that the board changes every turn means that every time it comes to my turn, I have to reevaluate the entire board state to figure out what's my best move. And that to me, I think was it felt like maybe it was dragging on a little bit too long.
Yeah, so a couple of cons for me. So this game, it's imprecise, I guess is the word that I'm looking for, and that drives me crazy in a game. So what I mean by that is when you place that string down on the board, things are just moving around constantly. And it drives me nuts, right? Like, I don't like the imprecision of that. Like, when people are trying to adjust the rope around and things are scooching in and they're moving around, it's just like a couple of millimeters, but I'm like, things are moving.
You just nudge that animal a little bit closer into the ring.
They're like, somebody will put a rope down, and I'm like, there's no way that's going to go around all that stuff. And then somehow magically, when they fiddle with it enough, it's enclosing everything. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Maybe it's because that stuff moved in close.
You just scored 17 points.
Wow. Awesome job. I don't know. Like, there were a couple times we like picked the rope up off the board and a couple of the tiles got like stuck to it and came off the board with it. And I was like, ah!
You just put them back generally close enough to where they belong.
Like stuff like that drives me crazy. Even like, I mean, this is a totally different game, but like Escape Curse of the Temple, which is an okay game. And it's a very different game. But the point I'm making is when I feel like mistakes are just happening a lot in a game or things are not going right and I don't have control over it because people might be accidentally making errors, it bothers me.
For me, this one, I don't know. I don't really know how to put my finger on it. It was just never really a nail biter for me. Like, I feel like I play a lot of games and I'm sitting there in between turns going like, oh, I really need to score like, X number more points. I really need to make something happen next turn. And this one, like, it's just such a laid back game that I don't know why. I didn't really care about winning during Savanna.
Well, I think it's laid back, and Jason, you touched on this earlier, because there's no strategy to this game. Okay? It's all tactical.
You take the best card that's available at the time,
exactly.
And you move on.
You look at the board, and you're like, okay, I've looked at the board. That's clearly my best move, so I'm going to make it. I'm going to take this research card because it's clearly the best one to take, and then I wait for everybody else to take their turn. Yep. And then I do it again on my next.
And it can be frustrating, too, when the available research cards to choose at the end of your turn is just kind of meh. Right. But then you choose a card, and all of a sudden, like, the best card possible comes out on the board just because of circumstances, right? There's nothing that you can do to control that. And so it just gives the next person, unless they just don't notice that it's a good card. Basically, you're relying on other people not noticing that there are better opportunities out there.
Right.
And so as long as you're choosing the best opportunity for you at the time, like the board state changes slightly. Somebody could take an animal from you.
Yeah.
Again, another rule that I forgot to mention is once you place a pawn on an animal, no one else can score that animal, right? So somebody could take your animal, and it could change your ability to score, but it's gonna change it by 2 or 3 points maximum, right?
I think that point is very much the reason why I find myself like in the middle of this game just going, I don't even care. Fine. Can we play the next game, please?
Right. No, I feel you on that. And to Jason's point about the cube, like I was searching for strategy in this game. I was like, okay, well maybe it's the cubes, right? I'm like, well, if I put my cube on here, then when I rope this in, maybe I can get this land tile bonus that nobody else can get. But really, once the game finished, I was like, I'm just going to put the cube on the animal that's worth the most points, right? There was just there was no strategy there. It's just like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm going to do. It makes the most sense, and that's what you do.
I feel like one thing that you always have to evaluate when you're considering whether or not you like a game and would want to play it again is like, how do you feel when you win, right? If I were to, I haven't won this game, but like if I were to win, like I literally wouldn't care.
I have won, and
Did you care?
It was luck.
Not especially.
You made a lot of points like several turns in a row.
To be honest, I felt like when I won that game that we played the other night, I felt like, well, it just so happened that I was able to choose the best research cards that were available at the time, and they happened to be better than the ones that you guys were able to choose. And so that doesn't feel like it's not a satisfying win. It's not oh, I figured out the puzzle and I optimized better than somebody else. It was it just turned out better for me.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, Jason. So overall impression, grade?
I think for me, again, kind of what I said earlier, I think for me, it overstayed its welcome a little bit. It was a bit too long for what it was. I think if this game was a 5-10 minute game, it could be entertaining once or twice. But again, the strategy just doesn't go that deep. I think for me, I rated this a 3, but I was on the fence between 2 and 3. So.
Okay. Feeling like there's a trend for tonight because I thought about this before we recorded, and I had it as a 3 mainly because I was just kind of like, I don't care. Like I felt like it was, our word for number 3 is meh. But now that we think of it, I kind of want to put this as a 2. I kind of I think I would eye roll a little bit if I came to a game night and people were like Streak Savanna, like let's go for it, because it just doesn't do anything for me, and I that's kind of what our criteria is. We just don't enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not broken. It does what it does.
Yeah.
I feel like I would rather goof around on my phone while I'm playing the game rather than think about the game.
That's never a good sign.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a funny joke, but it's kind of real. If I would rather look at whatever's happening on Instagram or eBay, rather than pay attention to the game, it's not a great game.
All right. Okay. All right. So there's no strategy to this game. Okay. In my opinion. All right. I think I've made that clear. It's purely tactical. I don't enjoy games where I don't feel like I can set myself up for future turns and feel clever. There is no room for that in this game. None. It is just look at the board and take your best move, and that's it. I was intrigued by the string lane mechanism, and I think it's cool, and I think some other games should try to use it.
Yeah.
I can see how it could be used in a really interesting way if you can get rid of the fiddliness, which drives me crazy. But it's an interesting idea. Unfortunately, the interesting idea is not enough to save this train wreck of a game. This is a 2 for me. Okay? Who's bad cop now? All right? That's all right. This is a 2. I wouldn't give it a 1 because, like Cameron said, I don't think it's broken. But it's just, there's nothing redeeming about this game to me. This game is long gone for me. Okay? If I can get somebody to buy it.
Let the record show that Chris rated a game lower than I did.
I did. I was super excited when you said 3.
Chris is now interested in selling his copy of this game, which he just reviewed.
I'm sure nobody in my game group is going to buy it.
Please try it out. You could probably get a good deal.
Those are our thoughts on String Savanna. It's unfortunate, great potential, but just poor execution, honestly. However, if after hearing the review, you're still intrigued by the game, or you still might want to give it a try, if you look for the IDW edition of this game, it is still available online through some online retailers, and there are also quite a few listings of this game in the Board Game Marketplace, 12, the last time I checked. So it's pretty available if you want to try it out. Maybe the new printing fixes some things, but I did do a little research on that, and it seems to be a straight reprint with just a component upgrade.
Of course, if you want the older edition, Chris's copy will presently be available. He does ship USPS
That's
and
right.
UPS.
Out of here. All right, that's our final thoughts on String Savanna.
Rome needs a connection to Brundisium, and the players have been tasked with building via Appia in order to allow for fast travel between the two cities. To create the road, they'll need to break off stone tiles in the quarry, then travel to Brundisium, laying out the tiles creating the path that will all follow in the years ahead. This travel costs sesterces, but will bring crucial victory points and glory from Rome in return.
Riveting.
Well done. Via Appia, published in 2013 by Queen Games, currently ranked 2,681 on the BGG rankings, so the highest of the 3 that we're talking about tonight. Designer of this game is Michael Feldkotter. So I had to look this guy up. I thought I recognized his name. He has designed a couple other games. So recently he designed a game called Ikwazu that was released by Haba and their family line of games, kind of like the Karuba line. I've not played it, but I've heard it's pretty good. He's also published a card game called Little Devils that I have played, which is terrible. It absolutely sucks. I did not like the game.
We're not going to review it. You're just going to come right out and say it's terrible.
Already sold. Okay, it's gone. All right. So how did we hear about this game and where did I get it? Okay, so I definitely remember where I heard about this game. Okay, so years ago on the Dice Tower on the podcast, Tom Vassell and Eric Summerer did a top 10 list of their favorite 10 Queen games. Okay, and this was mentioned on Tom's list, I think. It was like around like 7 or 8, something like that. And I remember being intrigued by it because when he was describing it, he was describing the quarry that I'm about to talk about in a minute, and I was intrigued by it. So it kind of stuck in my mind. I bought this game at Atomic Empire in Durham, or one of our local board game stores, but that's how I heard about it. So a brief rules overview. Like I said, I'm not going to go over the rules in detail here because this is a little bit longer game, but I will hit the highlights. So like Cameron said, in this game, you are building the Via Appia, which if you don't know, the Via Appia is a road a road from ancient Rome that ran all the way into the southeast corner of Italy to a city called Brundisium, okay? Very famous road. Troops traveled along it. There was trade along the road. Very important road. So in the game, you're building this road, okay? And the way that you do that is through action selection, okay? So you can do 4 different actions on your turn. On your turn, you can take a card from the top of the board. It's an income card where you can either get money, which helps you move along the road, along the Via Appia, or you can take a raw stone, which is a circular stone of 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large, okay? What's important about these stones, these raw stones, is what leads into really what makes the game interesting and why we're talking about the game right now.
Unusual.
And it's very unusual. And that's the quarry, okay? And that's the second action in the game. So on your turn, and I'll try to explain this in a way that makes sense, there is a cardboard structure that sits above the board and is loaded with all of these circular stones, small, medium, large, okay? So they're packed in there. And what you have is you have this wooden mallet where you load one of your raw stones on one side and you push that raw circular stone into the quarry. And what that's supposed to represent is the stones moving through the quarry and getting smoothed and polished for the road. So when you push it in, stones, hopefully, will fall off on the other end.
Big hopefully.
Hopefully fall off. And then you will take those stones, and they will be finished stones that you'll then put in a cart to build the road.
It's like those quarter things at the beach stores.
Exactly.
You go in, you waste, $4 in quarters, hoping that you're gonna make 10.
Yeah, the quarter falls in, and the pushes it, and there it's like hanging off the edge. It's like that. But then you knock things off; they become finished stones.
Except for in Jason's case, they just never fall off.
So you've got your finished stones. And then as your third action, you can take those stones and you can lay them into empty spaces on the Via Appia to score points. Large stones are worth 5, the medium-sized stones are worth 3, and the small stones are worth 1. But what adds an interesting layer is when you're laying these stones, the road is broken up into segments. So when you're placing those stones, there's a component of area control there where if you lay the most stones in a segment, you'll score 8 bonus points at the end of the round, and whoever lays the second most will score 4 at the end of the round. So you're trying to get as many stones in a segment as possible. For your fourth action, instead of doing any of those 3 prior things, you can instead spend coins to move along those placed stones in the Via Appia. The reason you would do that is once you move along the road, if you move into the next city and you're first to get there, you'll get victory points, the most possible. Second, who gets there will get some, but not as much who got there first.
The race.
There's a little bit of a race element in moving along that road to also score points. So there are many different ways you can score points in this game. The way the game ends is once the Via Appia is completely constructed, or once the first person lands in Brundisium, you complete that round, and then the game will end that way as well, even if the road is not fully constructed. Okay?
There's 3 segments, right?
3 segments of road. And that is generally how you play via Appia. So, Cameron, well, actually, before I even talk to one of you, all right, we're going to skip pros and cons here. I just want to talk about the quarry, all right?
All right.
Because that's really...
I have many things to say about the quarry.
That's really what makes this game unique, right? The pusher, okay? So what do you guys think about the quarry, the pusher?
I think Jason has to go first.
Yeah, he looks like he's just, dying to say something.
I have a lot of thoughts about this game. I wanted to like this game. And I think that the mechanic of the quarry is a really interesting one. It is a very unique thing. I've never seen it in any other game before. You need stones out of the quarry in order to get the finished stones in order to build the road. It's a necessity, right? But you're not guaranteed to get anything from that action. So it almost comes down to this game being more about timing and about when do I push or when do I try to get stones out of the quarry? Because you can imagine, it's a little hard to picture, but you can imagine based on the way the stones that are in the quarry right now are laid out, even pushing a large stone into the quarry might get you nothing.
Sure.
Because there could be gaps. There could be...
So then don't do it.
A bunch of stones may have just fallen off. Well, right. But
right.
We'll get to my...
Who's the sucker?
We'll get to my reasoning
Jason
about why that's flawed in a second.
Okay, I'm ready.
But yeah, it's always been a frustrating experience for me playing this game, and I don't know, maybe I'm just super unlucky, but I think it's been a frustrating experience to me when I see people push stones in, even small ones, and they get like 7 stones that drop off the end of the quarry, and then I try to push in like 3 big ones and I get nothing. So it's hit and miss for me on the quarry. I think it's a cool element. It's definitely unique, but it's more frustrating than it is unique to me.
I want to offer a really brief correction to something that you said. So you mentioned that you risk, pushing a stone into the quarry and getting nothing. That sort of harkens back to the first time that we played this game where Chris had played it before, but he was playing a different game that night when you and I played it, and we missed the rule that actually if you push a stone into the quarry...
2 stones.
If you push 2 stones.
Yes.
Okay, so if you push 2, you have an opportunity to push 1 or 2 stones.
Correct.
When you go to take the quarry action. So if you choose to push 2 stones and nothing comes out of the other end, nothing falls off onto the game board, then you do get a consolation prize, which I think is what is it? There's a gray, a white, and a brown.
You can either get a coin or you can get one small finished stone.
Small stone.
One piddly stone.
So if you do, the correction I wanted to make is that if you do push 2 stones, you do get a sort of a consolation prize of like 1 small stone. So it's not nothing.
That's fair.
But
I'm not sure it makes the ultimate difference for me, but that's fair.
And that's fair. I think when I consider the quarry itself, like I really enjoyed it because to me it was very much, it's a cool element and it definitely is what gets you what you need in order to win. Like you score points in via Appia by placing finished stones on the board. So if you don't go to the quarry, you're not going to be able to score points.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes the decision about when do I choose to take that action, and then when I choose to take that action, which stones do I put in there, in what order?
Yep.
And can I afford to hold out until someone else goes and puts their stones in and, maybe gets 1 small stone or maybe doesn't, for me to jump in there and then maybe I'll cash in on, my decision to go to the quarry. I appreciated that.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think the thing that's unique about the quarry and where you have to be careful with the quarry is you have to be very patient with the quarry. Okay? So if you're ever looking at the quarry and you're like, nothing is going to fall off of here, just don't do that action, right? Like, you wait for somebody else to do it, right? Like, this isn't a game term, but it's kind of one I've created for this game. It's called priming the quarry. That's how I think about it. Like, if I'm looking at the quarry and I'm like, if I put stones in here, all I'm going to do is set up the person after me, then you need to find something else to do. Okay? Move down the road or take another action, take a card, right? Which is also tricky because you can set people up with that too. And I didn't explain this in the rules because I didn't want to take too long on the rules, but if you leave the final card up top, whoever takes that last card will get a +1 pushing bonus where they can push a third stone into the quarry if they want as well. And that can be really powerful, right? So this game is very dependent on not setting up your opponents too much. But I guess what I'm trying to say in regards to the quarry is you want people to prime it for you, right? And so you just have to like be patient there. If you really don't have any other good options, one thing I found that I did is I took the small stones, which are kind of worthless otherwise, and I intentionally pushed them in there in an unhelpful way to just get the single small stone, but not really help anybody else. You can kind of finagle it that way a little bit by kind of like you're stalling and you're waiting for other people to kind of do things. And yeah, you just can't set it up too good for everybody else. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It makes sense. I think that if everyone is playing under that same mindset, though, the game grinds to a halt. Because no one would be willing to push, and theoretically, because of the way the game rules are set up, you could just continually draw new stones, draw new coins, endlessly.
Yeah,
right? And no one would ever
But
push
after a
stones out
while,
of
if
the
somebody
quarry.
has 2 large stones, or if they have 2 large stones and the +1 pusher, then they're going to push because they know they're going to knock something off the other side, right? Like it will progress eventually. You just have to pick the right time to progress it. You're not always going to knock 6 stones off the other side unless you're Ben and you like smash the mallet into the quarry and like knock half the stones off.
Oh man, we're throwing Ben under the bus. The first
Heck yeah, we
episode.
are. And I know he's listening right now. I'm sure of it.
You'll meet Ben in a future episode.
That's right.
But I think that actually, I know we sort of said we took pros and cons a little bit differently for this one. I do think that leads to a little bit of a con, particularly when it comes to the quarry. Like the force with which a player, like, you know, engages the quarry could lead to some maybe controversy. I didn't hit it too hard.
You just have to be clear on that.
Yeah.
When you teach this game, you have to just make it clear, like, push the stone into the quarry in a controlled manner, right? And make it clear, because people, some people just can't resist the urge to just, like, shove it in there, you know, because you want to knock things off. You just push it in there, right?
The quarry is not about momentum. It's about, like, basic gravity.
Although you can direct it a little bit. So I will say one more thing about the quarry and then I'll stop because I'm intrigued by it. But here's the thing about the quarry. So you can kind of direct how the stone enters to try to push things off the other end, but there's definitely randomness to it. I'm not going to deny that. But I would ask the question, how is that quarry any more random than a dice roll or a card flip or a cube tower? I would argue it's less random.
Oh, for sure.
Because I can look at it, right? I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, okay, I think I know what might happen if I push a stone in here. Whereas if I roll dice, I don't know what the heck's going to happen. It's just random.
If you have a basic understanding of like geometry, you can know, okay, well, it's going to be better for me to put it on the left side of the quarry than the right side of the quarry.
Although it might do a weird fidget and kind of...
Well, that's true. It might do something that you don't anticipate, but like you can see where like the other circles in the quarry are like touching versus like where there's a giant hole.
Right,
you can feel there's a giant hole. Like obviously I'm not going to push anything forward if I put it on the right side versus if I nudge it up against the left side, you know, where all these circles are sort of touching. You know, so there you do have some control. I could agree with that.
Final thoughts on the quarry, Jason?
Final thoughts. Well, I think I gave most of my thoughts. If we're moving on to, you know, pros and cons or other thoughts, for me, playing this game feels like I'm playing a medium weight game that ultimately boils down to playing one of those like arcade crane games, you know, with the claw. It's like I'm waiting on the claw, right? And it never works out, right? It's rigged against you.
It's insane.
That's what playing this game feels like to me. I will say, you know, on a more, you know, practical note, like you mentioned, rolling a die it's no more random than rolling a die, and I would agree with that. But I would say that any game where the primary scoring mechanism is based on me rolling a die, that's too much randomness for me. Because you can argue that, okay, well, if it's not ideal to push a stone into the quarry, then don't do it, right? Mm-hmm. Sure. But your alternative to doing that is the only other scoring mechanism in this game is race to the next city, right? And racing to the next city involves coins. And if you're going to not push into the quarry, great, collect coins, right? And hope to race to the end. But the amount of points that you get from that is so small in comparison to the amount of points that you get from laying stones that it just seems pointless to me. Racing to the end of the road, which costs a ton of coins to be able to get there, to get 6 points when most of the scoring comes from 1, 3, or 5 points per stone that you lay, when you can lay 2 stones at a time. And on top of that, you're getting area majority in terms of laying those stones in a particular section. It just outweighs, like, there's no benefit to me to racing down the path as an alternative to pushing. And so the primary scoring mechanism is based on getting stones out of that quarry. And you can say that it's a game of chicken ultimately, right? Of like, who's going to force somebody else to do it? But to me, I don't know, that game of chicken just wasn't enjoyable.
All right.
So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Other pros?
Yeah, I mean, choosing when to shift from I'm collecting stones or I'm collecting coins to, and for that matter, choosing which tiles you pick up, because some of them have different combinations, right? So it'll be like 2 gray ones, or a gray and a white, or just 1 large brown stone. That matters a lot, and I think that is a little bit of a caveat to some of the criticisms that Jason, I think, has for this game, is like, it really matters what you bring to the quarry. If you go in every single time you take the quarry action and you're just shoving tiny little gray stones in there, you're not going to get anything. Sorry, like, you're not going to get anything there. You have to invest your turns in the ones that give you the larger stones, so that when it's your turn, you can choose. I'm going to put, a white one and a brown one in there sometimes, and move, what I think the ultimate distance of those 2 diameters added together is like 1.5 inches. Like, if you can contribute that to the quarry, like, it is going to yield for you in a different way than just putting 2 small gray stones in there. And like, I've experienced that while playing the game. So yeah. I definitely think there's good decisions to do that, and there's good decisions to say, like, I'm really going to go for it this time. Sure.
So you're saying I just don't have large enough stones for this game? I hear you.
There might just be a problem with the size of your stones.
Yeah, I do like. I'm not saying there's like numerous paths to victory here, but there are options. So I did enjoy the push and pull between, when do I go to the quarry to get stones? When do I place stones? And when do I move on the road? Because another interesting thing about this game is highly dependent on you looking at what your opponents are doing. Highly.
Oh, yes.
If you are not paying attention to the quarry and setting people up, if you're not paying attention to what's in other people's carts and what they can and cannot lay, they will lay it before you.
Let's talk about cons. Yeah. What do you got, Jason?
Outside of the quarry.
I think I've listed my cons. Most of them revolve around the quarry, but I think that is the game, right? The quarry is the game.
A big part of it, yeah.
And so the only other thing that I noted down was, it is a little unsatisfying that you get these large, like, wooden stone pieces and you push them off the quarry to get tiny little cardboard chits that you actually, like, lay down on the board. There's something unsatisfying about that to me, that you get to start
need the deluxe Kickstarter version via Appia.
Yeah, I suppose. But yeah, other than that, I think I've said my piece on this one.
I have thought about this. So actually, it's kind of odd to say this in the context of cons, but like, I actually won the game this way, playing it one time. The game can end really abruptly. If the road is fully constructed, even if no one has walked on the 3rd segment, like, the game is over. If you finish building the 3rd segment, it's just like, boom, game over.
Yep.
even in the game that I was playing, I was anticipating like, okay, cool. Like I'm going to build this, I'm going to put this finished tile in place, and then I got to, walk my guy over, and it was just like, oh, the game's over. And it was like, oh, and I don't know. There was just something a little bit unsatisfying about that. Even though I won, like it didn't make a difference to me. It was like, oh, like I thought that there was so much more like left. I thought that someone had to like get to the end, because to me it felt like maybe there was like points left on the table, and it could have been like potentially a balancing feature of like, say someone had been, saving up a lot of coins and were counting on being able to score that final, big six in order to balance out the fact that they didn't get to lay, the finished tiles on certain segments. I don't know. It felt a little abrupt. I consider that, potentially a con.
All right.
Final ratings.
Yeah. You should go first.
I will go first. I don't think it's a surprise for me. I rated this game a 2.
Oh, my word.
I did not enjoy it. Honestly, I was between a 2 and a 3. I wanted to like this game. Every time that I've played it, I've been intrigued by the theme and by the mechanics, surprisingly, despite the amazing flavor text that comes along with it. The mechanics of this game really do intrigue me, and I wanted to like it. And it's simple. The rules are easy to explain. It makes sense. It feels like the right length for the game that it should be. For me, I think the luck of the draw with the quarry and just that game of chicken that you're playing back and forth with it, just, I don't know, it didn't appeal to me. So, yeah, it's a 2 for me. It's not a flawed game, but just not one that I would choose to play on a regular basis, I think.
All right.
When I think about this game, I definitely think I would play it again. I don't get that gut feeling, if someone were to mention it, like, oh, really don't want to play Appia. I really appreciate the fact that you have to go to the quarry to win the game. There are a lot of good decisions: when to gather stones, when to go to the quarry, when to move. It's tough, and I think that makes it engaging. So I rate this game a 4. Consider it a good game.
Nice. So, obviously, when we're reviewing games, I guess we're board game reviewers now. We have to consider a lot of things: mechanisms, theme, how well those mechanisms play out in a game. But one thing that I always ask myself, was it fun? Did I have fun playing it? For me, the quarry was not a source of frustration, but it was a source of fun. I just loved putting the stone in there and pushing it through and seeing what would fall off. I can only speak for myself, but for me...
You were having fun every time no stones fell off from you.
Well, see, and I was just getting ready to say, I can only speak for me, but in my experience, I would say 4 out of the 5 times when I load a stone in the quarry, what happened is what I thought would happen. Sometimes I was pleasantly surprised. Sometimes more fell off than I was actually expecting, but usually what I expected to happen typically happened. So for me, I didn't see it as very random. Like I said, I feel it to be much less random than a dice roll or a card draw. I feel like I had some control over it. And so for that reason, because it's unique, because I thought it was fun, especially with the quarry, I felt like there were good strategic decisions outside the quarry with the movement. I like this game a lot. This is a 5 for me.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent game. I would gladly play this game again with people that would want to experience it. I think it's awesome. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm glad I have it in my collection.
Well, this would be a boring podcast if we agreed on everything.
Exactly. So. I'm actually relieved that we're not.
Yeah.
And that we don't sound like an echo chamber of each other, and that we all have our own opinions and ideas.
Yeah. So where can we get via Appia?
Yeah, so unfortunately, because this is a great game in my opinion, this game is hard to find, okay? You are not going to find this game on any online retailer, and you're probably not going to find this game in a board game store unless they've been open for a while and they just have an incredible back stock of stuff. It's just rare, to be honest. There are 5 copies of the game on BGG currently. They range anywhere from $36 to $65. It's also on eBay. 3 listings all the way up to $100. I mean,
wow.
And that's what happens with out-of-print games, right? They just get marked up because they're rare.
Would you think this is one that like would be super cool if they decided to reprint it.
Yeah, I think it would be cool to have a nicer version of the game. Queen Games does reprint games pretty regularly. I think it's worthy of a reprint. Tom Vassell, I guess we'll put him to the test. Vassell's Law, as he says. He says that if a game is good enough, it will get reprinted at some point. Okay. I think this game is deserving of a reprint. I think it would be awesome to see because it is a little hard to get, but you can find it.
I think Jason wants some nicer finished tiles. Yeah. So Queen Games, if you're listening to this podcast, some just nicer finished stones for Jason would be nice.
And then all is forgiven. So that's our final thoughts on Via Appia.
So, on behalf of all of us here at Hidden Gems, we just want to thank you for listening. Hopefully we've introduced you to some new games that you're unfamiliar with, perhaps sparked your interest. In either case, we hope you'll continue to join us on our quest for hidden gems. You can check out the credits or show notes if you'd like to follow us on our various social media platforms. And we'll see you all next time. For now, I'm Jason.
I'm Cameron.
And this is Chris.
Thanks for listening. This episode of Hidden Gems, number 1, was recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina on January 31, 2021. Join us in 2 weeks when we talk about auction games, including a relatively forgotten title by the great Stefan Feld. Hidden Gems is produced and edited by Chris Alley, Cameron Lockey, and Jason Yanchuleff. Our show's logo was illustrated by designer and artist Katelyn Nieto. Check out her work on Instagram at It's Katelyn Nieto. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to join the discussion on our many social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook at Hidden Gems Board Game Podcast, Instagram at hiddengems.podcast, and Twitter at Hidden Gems Board. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hidden Gems. And until next time, fellow gem seekers, enjoy your games and enjoy your search. This travel cost sesterces. This travel costs sesterces, but will bring crucial victory points.
Keep going.
What's the word? How do I say it?
Sesterces.
Sesterces.